She had $286, a 10-year-old daughter, and no plan. But when Emily turned a forgotten bus into a bakery on wheels, she found more than survival. She found purpose. Watch her journey from loss to light. And if it touched you, hit like and subscribe for more stories of real courage. The day it all came undone was an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day when the sky looked too clean, too bright, as if it didn't care that a life was quietly splitting apart beneath it. Emily Sanders sat in her compact office at the construction firm, her fingers frozen above the keyboard, staring at the email subject line that read, "Termination Notice." For a moment, she thought it was spam, a mistake, maybe something that would disappear if she blinked enough times. But when she opened it and saw her name printed neatly in black letters, "Effective," immediately her breath snagged in her chest. Her hands trembled as she read the rest. The company had been sold, and her position was no longer essential. After 12 years of showing up early and leaving late after skipping family vacations and birthdays to balance budgets and meet deadlines, Emily was no longer essential. She sat very still, as though sudden movement might make the truth worse. When she finally gathered her purse and walked toward the parking lot, the world outside felt cruelly normal. Sunlight shimmered off windshields, construction workers shouted from scaffolds, a delivery truck rumbled past, blaring pop music. It was as if nothing had changed, but everything had. In her car, she exhaled once, long and shaky, and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Mark. Signed the papers. "It's final. Don't contact me." She stared at the message until the letters blurred. Somewhere deep in her, something went silent. Later, in the small beige office of her divorce attorney, the words "frozen assets" were mentioned like a minor inconvenience. Emily nodded numbly, pretending to understand. When she asked how long the lawyer said could be months. Months, she repeated to herself. Months of rent, groceries, gas, on what? Her checking account showed $286.14. That night, she spread the cash on the motel bedspread, the bills wrinkled and soft from use, and felt a kind of humiliation she hadn't known was possible. Lila was brushing her teeth in the cramped bathroom, humming some pop tune faintly out of key. The sound almost broke her. The next morning, they checked into a low-rise roadside motel on the edge of town. The kind of place with flickering neon letters, "Well, see me," and a smell of bleach that never quite covered the damp. The woman at the front desk didn't look up when Emily paid for 3 nights. $25 per night cash only. The key was attached to a plastic tag shaped like the state of Ohio. Room 14. Inside, there was a bed, a small table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a heater that rattled like loose change. Emily pulled the curtains closed against the bright afternoon, then sat on the edge of the bed trying to map the next step. She made lists in her mind, job applications, groceries, maybe pawn her wedding ring, but her thoughts slid away before they could form. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring quietly. The child's calmness always startled her, as though Lila understood more than she let on. "Mom," the girl said without looking up. "Are we going to be okay?" Emily hesitated. There was something unbearably small about hearing that question from such a young mouth. She wanted to say yes loudly with conviction, to be the kind of mother who could turn fear into laughter. Instead, her voice came out soft, cracked around the edges. "We're just taking a break, sweetheart. A little detour. Every road has one." Lila nodded and went back to her coloring, as if that answer was enough. Emily turned away quickly, biting her lip until she tasted salt. That night after Lila fell asleep, Emily sat by the window with a cup of motel coffee that tasted like burnt paper. She watched the headlights slide across the parking lot one by one, and thought about the life that had slipped through her hands, the house with the maple tree out front, the dinner table laughter, the rhythm of shared mornings. She remembered Mark's cologne lingering on the hallway, even after he'd stopped coming home, the quiet lies that built up like dust on a shelf, until they choked her. How could a decade dissolve into silence so fast? A knock startled her. The motel manager stood outside, heavy-set and weary, holding a folded receipt. Just reminding you payments due every 3 days, he said, not unkindly. She nodded, thanked him, and closed the door. When she looked at the folded paper, she realized her money would barely stretch a week. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass and whispered, "I'll figure it out." But the words felt weightless. The next morning she woke before dawn. The world was tinted blue still and uncertain. She watched her daughter sleeping, one small arm thrown across the blanket, and felt something ache deep in her chest. There was fear there, yes, but beneath it a thread of resolve. She didn't know how or where or when, but she knew she had to start moving again. The first frost came early that year. By the time Emily stepped out of the motel that morning, the sky was the color of steel, and her breath hung in the air like smoke. The manager had already taped a notice to their door payment due by noon. She folded it carefully, tucked it in her pocket, and led Lila to the car. They sat inside the Malibu for a long moment, neither speaking. The heater coughed weakly before giving up altogether. Emily rubbed her hands together, staring at the dashboard, as though the numbers there might rearrange themselves into salvation. When the tow truck arrived, it was almost a relief. The driver, a man in his 50s with a coffee thermos and eyes that didn't quite meet hers, explained it was for registration lapses and unpaid fees. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Nothing I can do." His voice was not unkind, but final. She gathered their 2 duffel bags, a blanket, and Lila's small stuffed rabbit. They stood on the curb as the truck rumbled away, tail lights shrinking into the gray morning. The sound of metal on metal echoed in her chest long after the vehicle disappeared. Lila tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, where are we going now?" Emily opened her mouth, but the words refused to come. The truth was, she didn't know. They spent that night in the lobby of a 24-hour laundromat, pretending to wait for a dryer that never finished. The hum of machines was oddly soothing, masking the sound of her daughter's quiet breathing, as Lila dozed with her head on Emily's lap. Around 3 a.m., the clerk, a woman with tired eyes, placed 2 paper cups of cocoa beside them. She didn't say anything, and neither did Emily. Kindness that small could break you open. By morning, Emily's last $20 bill was folded in her pocket, like a secret she was ashamed to spend. She walked aimlessly, dragging the duffel bags behind her. Her feet ached, her shoulders throbbed, and the cold seemed to seep through her skin into her bones. When they passed St. John's Episcopal Church, the old stone building looked like a memory of warmth. Tall windows glowing faintly through the fog. A wooden sign read, "Shelter for Women and Children. Inquire within." Emily hesitated, pride rising like a final barrier. But Lila's small hand tightened around hers, and that was enough. Inside, the scent of soup and disinfectant mingled in the air. A woman in a knitted sweater greeted them, asked a few questions, and led them downstairs. The shelter's basement was lined with folding cots, each draped with a clean blanket. A faint hum of an old furnace filled the silence. "You can stay as long as needed," the woman said softly. "We're full, but we'll make room." That night, as Emily tucked Lila into one of the cots, she felt the sharp contrast between the cold cement floor beneath her feet and the faint warmth of her daughter's skin. Lila whispered, "It's not so bad, Mom. The people here are nice." Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yeah," she whispered back, "they are." But when the lights dimmed, she lay awake, staring at the pipes above, feeling the weight of every wrong turn pressing down like gravity. The next morning, the smell of oatmeal drew her toward the small kitchen. There, a man with silver hair and a faded red flannel shirt was stirring a pot on the stove. His back was slightly stooped, his movements careful but sure. "Coffee's on the counter," he said without turning. His voice carried a gravelly kindness. Emily poured herself a cup, its warmth startling against her cold fingers. "You new here?" he asked, finally glancing at her. "Yes, just last night." "I'm Carl," he said, extending a hand thick with old burn scars. "Used to be a firefighter. Now I just cook for whoever's hungry enough not to complain." She smiled faintly. "Emily, my daughter's Lila. Good name, he said, nodding. Means night, doesn't it? Beautiful thing, the night it makes you see light, clearer. He ladled oatmeal into a bowl and slid it across the counter. Eat. No one can think straight on an empty stomach. Over the next few days, she watched him work steady, deliberate humming softly to himself as he chopped vegetables or washed dishes. He seemed to know the names of everyone who came through, remembering small details others would forget. One afternoon, as they cleaned up together, he said, "You know, Emily, folks think losing things means you're empty, but sometimes it just means there's finally space for something new." She didn't answer, just nodded, fighting the lump that rose in her throat. Outside, the November wind howled against the old church walls. Inside, the basement buzzed with quiet activity. Children laughing over board games, women whispering about job applications, someone tuning a broken guitar. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long while, a trace of belonging. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was the faint outline of hope. She didn't know it then, but this fragile beginning, this place of worn blankets, steaming oatmeal, and a retired firefighter with kind eyes would become the foundation for everything that came after. The third morning at St. John's began with the sound of rain tapping on the old stained glass windows. Emily stood by the basement door, watching the light filter through in muted colors, trying to imagine what her next step could possibly be. The shelter had given her safety, but it was a fragile one, a place built for nights, not futures. Carl noticed her silence during breakfast. He was stirring soup in a large pot, the steam rising in soft curls around his lined face. "You're thinking too loud again," he said with a half smile. Emily looked up from her bowl of oatmeal. "I'm just wondering where to go next." He nodded, then set his spoon down. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her through the back door of the church and into a small gravel lot lined with overgrown weeds. The November air bit at their cheeks, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Parked behind a row of forgotten lawnmowers and rusted tools was an old yellow school bus. The paint was faded to the color of old corn husks, and ivy had crept up one side, clutching at its frame like green fingers. One window was cracked, and a bird had built a nest inside the wheel well. Carl motioned toward it with a slight shrug. "Been sitting here 10 years. We used to use it for church trips, but now it's just taking up space." Emily stepped closer, running her hand over the cold metal. It felt solid beneath the rust, like something that had been waiting for a second chance. "It's still got a roof," Carl said. "If you can clean it out and make it safe, it's yours. Church won't miss it." Emily blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. "You mean stay in it? Why not?" His voice was gentle, practical. "It's dry, it's yours to lock, and it doesn't ask rent." He grinned. "All it needs is someone stubborn enough to believe it can still be useful." For the first time in months, Emily felt something like possibility. It took her 5 full days to clean the bus. She scrubbed mildew from the floor, peeled off cracked vinyl seats, and swept out years of dust and forgotten bulletins. Lila helped her laughter echoing as they uncovered little treasures, an old marble, a paper airplane, a faded sticker of a dinosaur. At night, they slept on cots in the basement, and in the mornings they returned to the bus with sponges, bleach, and determination. By the end of the week, the metal walls smelled faintly of lemon instead of decay. On the 5th evening, they carried in 2 borrowed blankets, a lantern, and the little stuffed rabbit Lila refused to sleep without. Emily laid the blankets over a row of seats she'd covered with a tarp. The lantern's glow painted the inside in shades of honey and gold. Lila crawled under the covers, giggling. "It's not so bad, Mom," she said, eyes bright. "It's like our own fort." Emily smiled, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yeah, our own fort," she whispered. But when Lila drifted off, Emily sat awake a long while, listening to the creak of the wind against the bus. She touched the wall beside her and felt its chill seep into her fingertips. Tears came quietly, unexpected but steady. They weren't the loud kind, just the sort that slide down because there's nothing left to hold them back. The next morning she woke to a pale sunlight cutting through the dusty windows, Carl stood outside holding a thermos and 2 sandwiches. "Breakfast," he said simply. "How's the place?" She opened the door, smiling faintly. "It's home, I guess." He nodded with approval. "That's the spirit." Then he handed her a flyer he'd folded in half. "Clark's Auto Wash is hiring part-time. Owner's a decent man. Tell him Carl sent you." Emily walked there that afternoon, the air crisp and bright. The car wash was a noisy blur of hoses and soap suds, the smell of detergent strong enough to sting her nose. The manager, a balding man named Frank Clark, eyed her resume, a single sheet with 12 years of office work, and frowned. "You ever washed a car before?" "Not professionally," she admitted, forcing a small smile. "But I learned fast." He sighed, then shrugged. "$9 an hour part-time, you clean the waiting area and help dry cars. Start tomorrow." She thanked him 3 times before leaving. The work was rough on her hands, colder than she expected. Water soaked through her gloves, numbing her fingers, but she didn't complain. Each evening she counted her earnings, folding the cash neatly into an envelope she hid inside her shoe. After 2 weeks, she had saved enough to buy a small propane camping stove she found on Marketplace for $30. That night she set it up carefully in the bus, following every safety instruction twice. The flame flickered blue, casting a soft glow against the metal walls. The smell of sizzling butter filled the tiny space as she heated a can of soup and toasted slices of bread. Lila sat cross-legged beside her, watching as if it were a feast. When they ate, neither spoke. The silence was full of gratitude, too fragile to name. For the first time since losing everything, Emily tasted warmth that wasn't borrowed. She felt the weight in her chest lift just a little, replaced by something she hadn't dared to feel in months, a quiet, trembling pride. By late December, the bus had become more than shelter. It was a fragile symbol of survival. Emily began to decorate the windows with bits of cloth Lila had found from donation boxes, making curtains out of old scarves. The chill of winter crept in through the thin walls, but they managed with extra blankets borrowed from the church. Each morning, Emily walked to Clark's Auto Wash, her breath white in the air, her hands raw from the cold. The job didn't pay much, but it gave her purpose, and every evening she returned to the bus with just enough left for a small dinner and gas for the heater. One night, while cleaning through the last of her boxes stacked under the bus seats, she found a wooden chest with her mother's initials carved faintly into it. Inside were letters yellowed with age, a small locket, and at the bottom a leather-bound notebook tied with twine. The cover was cracked, the pages worn soft at the edges. She opened it carefully. On the first page, written in faded ink, were the words, "Helen Whitaker, 1964. Her grandmother's name. Below it a note in elegant cursive. "When the world feels heavy, bake something light." Emily smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling. Her grandmother had died when she was 13, but she could still remember the smell of fresh bread wafting through the old farmhouse kitchen on Sunday mornings, the warmth that made everything grief weather or worry seem smaller. The recipes inside were handwritten, smudged with flour fingerprints and coffee stains. Some pages held notes in the margins, "More sugar if sad," or "Don't forget to smile while kneading." Emily ran her fingers over the words as though touching the hands that had written them. There was one recipe she remembered vividly, honey loaf for gray days. The ingredients were simple flour water, a pinch of salt yeast, and a spoonful of honey. She read it twice, feeling something stir within her, a memory of being small and barefoot in her grandmother's kitchen, watching dough rise like magic under a damp towel. That evening, the temperature dropped below freezing, and the small propane heater in the bus sputtered weakly. Lila curled beneath the blankets with her stuffed rabbit, already half asleep. Emily sat by the lantern, the cookbook open on her lap. The wind outside groaned through the trees, rattling the bus's loose panels, but inside there was a strange peace. She decided then, quietly, instinctively, that she would try baking again. Not to sell, not for survival, but because the memory of warmth had been gone too long. She gathered what she had: a half bag of flour from the church pantry, a packet of yeast that had been hiding in the back of a drawer, and a plastic spoon of sugar she'd saved from her morning coffee. There was no oven, but she still had her old cast-iron skillet. She mixed the ingredients in a metal bowl, her fingers stiff from the cold but steady. The dough was rough, uneven, clinging to her palms. She laughed softly, remembering her grandmother saying, "Good bread forgives your mistakes." When the dough was ready, she let it rest near the small flame of the stove. The air filled slowly with a faint sweetness, a scent that didn't belong to poverty or loss, it belonged to home. When she flipped the loaf and the bottom browned, she felt something flutter in her chest, a quiet thrill she hadn't known she could still feel. Lila stirred awake, sniffing the air. "Mom, are you baking?" Emily smiled. "Trying to. It smells like... warm," Lila murmured, curling back into her blanket. The next day at the shelter, Emily carried half the loaf, wrapped in a napkin, to share. The women there gathered around, their eyes bright with curiosity. When she sliced the bread, steam rose in delicate wisps. An older woman named Ruth took a piece, brought it close to her face, and whispered, "That smells like Sundays used to feel." Everyone laughed softly, and for a moment the basement felt alive with something almost sacred. They ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it carried a story. When Emily looked up, a man who had been silent all morning, a tall figure in a worn army coat, placed a $5 bill under the empty plate. "Keep baking," he said simply, before walking away. That night back in the bus, Emily sat with the notebook open beside her, tracing the faded lines of her grandmother's writing under the glow of the lantern. The scent of bread lingered on her hands, mixing with the faint smell of soap and smoke. She thought about the $5 bill, the laughter in the shelter, the way strangers had shared something so small and made it feel infinite. Lila slept beside her, breathing evenly, the rhythm of innocence steady against the quiet. Outside, snow began to fall, whispering against the windows. Emily tilted her head, watching the flakes drift through the beam of light, and felt a softness bloom inside her chest. It wasn't just bread she had made. It was proof that there was still something beautiful left to give, even in the smallest of hands. The following morning, sunlight spilled weakly through the church's narrow basement windows, casting a pale glow across the tables where the residents of St. John's Shelter ate their breakfast. Emily was helping Carl hand out bowls of oatmeal when a stranger walked in through the side door, bringing with him the crisp scent of cold air and coffee. He was tall, but slightly stooped. His white hair swept neatly back, and his hands, though spotted with age, moved with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime mastering small, exacting motions. "Donation drop-off," he said, setting a large cardboard box on the counter. "Bread, soup cans, and a few kitchen tools. Hope they're useful." Carl grinned as he wiped his hands on a towel. Leonard Price. He introduced the best cook this side of the Ohio River. Used to run the Riverstone Diner before it closed. Leonard shrugged modestly. "Retired, not expired," he said, and his eyes twinkled faintly behind his glasses. When Emily turned to thank him, Leonard's gaze caught on the loaf of bread resting on a plate by the stove, the last piece from the night before. He leaned closer, inspecting the crust, running a finger along the browned edge. "Who made this crust?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. The room grew quiet for a moment. Emily hesitated, unsure if she should claim it, then finally said softly, "I did." Leonard looked up, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a small, knowing smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Then you've got something no school can teach," he said, hard. The word settled in the air between them. Emily wasn't sure what to say, so she simply nodded, feeling her face flush. Leonard broke off a small piece of the bread, tasted it, and nodded again. "You used dry yeast?" "Yes," she said. "It's all I had." Still, he murmured that crumb has patience in it. Bread tells the truth about the hands that made it. "You can't rush it, can't fake it." He smiled again, this time warmer. "If you ever want to learn a few tricks, come find me here on Fridays. I cook lunch for the shelter crowd. They say it's volunteer work, but I call it therapy." That Friday, Emily took him up on the offer. While Carl and the others set tables, Leonard guided her through making soup from donated vegetables. His instructions were calm, and exact: slice evenly, stir gently. Never let the pot boil too hard. But what struck her most wasn't the recipe. It was the rhythm, the patience, the way he treated every ingredient like it mattered. He told stories while they worked of his diner's heyday, the customers who'd come for his famous biscuits, the wife who used to help him prep every morning before the breakfast rush. "She passed 5 winters ago," he said quietly. "I stopped baking after that. Kitchen felt too empty." Emily glanced at him, unsure how to respond, but Leonard gave a small shrug. "You stop feeding something, it dies. A marriage, a dream, even a loaf of bread. Everything worth keeping needs tending." After lunch, Leonard packed up his knives, but lingered near Emily. "Got something for you," he said, pulling a glass jar from his canvas bag. Inside was a soft, pale dough, bubbling gently alive in a way that surprised her. "This," he said, holding it like a precious relic, "is Grace. She's older than some people I know. Started her back in 03 when I was running the diner. Been feeding her ever since. She survived 2 power outages, a flood, and 1 heartbreak." He chuckled softly. "If she can make it through all that, she'll make it through anything." Emily stared at the jar, mesmerized by the tiny bubbles forming and bursting inside. "You're giving it to me?" Leonard nodded. "It's time she had a new home. Keep her warm, feed her every few days, and she'll give you the best bread you've ever tasted. But don't forget she's alive. You take care of her, she'll take care of you." Emily accepted it carefully, her hands trembling. "I don't know if I can keep something like this alive," she admitted. "Sure you can," he said. "You're still here, aren't you?" That night in the bus, the jar of Grace sat near the lantern, its surface rising and falling like a gentle breath. Lila leaned in close, fascinated. "It's alive?" she asked. "In a way," Emily said, smiling softly. "It's alive because someone cared enough to keep it that way." She watched her daughter's reflection in the glass, the golden light flickering over her face. The quiet between them was peaceful, full of something fragile yet growing. Emily placed her hand over the jar, feeling its faint warmth. She thought about Leonard's words, how everything precious needed tending, and realized it wasn't just about bread. It was about her, about Lila, about learning to feed the small hope that still flickered inside them both. Outside, the winter wind swept softly around the bus, but inside, Grace breathed steadily, a quiet promise that life like bread could rise again if you just kept it warm. The days after Leonard gave her the starter followed a rhythm both fragile and steady. Every evening after her shift at the car wash, Emily returned to the bus with her hands raw and her back sore, but her heart oddly light. The small jar of Grace sat near the lantern, alive and patient, bubbling faintly when fed with flour and water. It became their nightly ritual. Emily would knead the dough while Lila read aloud from an old book, her small voice filling the narrow space with warmth that neither cold nor worry could touch. The smell of baking began to cling to their clothes and hair, a faint sweetness that even the car wash soap couldn't erase. One evening, Frank Clark, the car wash manager, stopped by as Emily handed out pay envelopes. "You bring lunch again today?" he asked, sniffing the air as she unpacked her tinfoil. When she handed him a piece of bread, he took a bite and raised his eyebrows. "That's something else. How much you charge for one of these?" She blinked in surprise. "Oh, I just bake for us." "You should sell them," he said simply. "People around here'd pay good money for bread that tastes real." The idea lingered with her all night. By the following week, she started bringing a few extra loaves to work. She wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with bits of twine. The first day, she sold 3 loaves, one to Frank, one to a mechanic next door, and one to a woman who said it smelled like her grandmother's kitchen. $4 each. Emily held the 12 crumpled dollars in her hand at the end of the day, feeling as if she'd just discovered a new language, one where effort could be exchanged for dignity. Every night after that, she baked. Some evenings, the dough rose perfectly. Others, it slumped like tired shoulders. But Leonard's words echoed in her head. Everything worth keeping needs tending. So she tended. She worked, she baked, she saved. The sound of the mixer, an old hand crank she'd found at a thrift store, became the heartbeat of her nights. Lila helped label the loaves with scraps of paper, writing, made with love in uneven letters. They laughed together when flour dusted their faces like snow. The bus, once a symbol of loss, now smelled like hope. After a month, Emily had saved $480, enough to cover the small fee for a temporary vendor's license at the West Market, a weekend farmer's market on the edge of Columbus. Leonard helped her fill out the paperwork and even lent her a folding table. "Start small," he said, "but start proud." The night before the market, Emily barely slept. She woke before dawn, her breath fogging the cold air as she packed 10 loaves into a basket lined with a blue towel. She made a sign from cardboard and black marker that read, "Helen's Bread Bus, fresh from the heart." The name felt right, a nod to the woman whose quiet wisdom had traveled through time and hands to find her again. The market was already alive when she arrived. Stalls lined the street, colorful vegetables, honey jars, candles, laughter rising with the morning mist. She set up her table beside a woman selling homemade jams. First time, the woman asked kindly. Emily nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. "Don't worry," the woman said. "Everyone starts with shaking hands." At 8 sharp, she sliced 1 loaf into samples. The aroma drifted through the cool air, rich and sweet. People slowed as they passed, drawn by the smell. The first customer, an elderly man in a wool hat, took a sample, chewed thoughtfully, and smiled. "How much?" he asked. $4, she replied, voice trembling slightly. He handed her a 5 and said, "Keep the change." That was all it took. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur. Hands reached cash, exchanged smiles, shared. "This reminds me of my mom's kitchen," someone said. "You can taste love in every bite," another woman murmured, clutching her loaf as though it were treasure. Emily could only nod, her throat tight with emotion. When she looked down at her basket, it was empty. 10 loaves gone in less than an hour. She stood there, still holding her last paper bag, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Leonard appeared around mid-morning, his old coat buttoned to the chin, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Sold out already?" he asked. She nodded, eyes shining. 40 minutes. He chuckled. "Guess I'll have to come earlier next week." She handed him the empty basket. "I didn't expect it," she said softly. "I thought maybe I'd sell 1 or 2. "That's how good things begin," he replied. Quietly then, all at once. Back at the bus that night, Emily counted her earnings on the small folding table. $40 from the market, 12 from her co-workers, and a single crumpled $5 bill she kept aside, the first one anyone had paid her for bread. She pressed it flat and tucked it into the pages of Helen's cookbook like a promise to the woman who'd started it all. Lila leaned against her shoulder, drowsy. "Did people like it, Mom?" she asked. "They loved it," Emily whispered. Her voice trembled, not from fatigue, but from wonder. For the first time, she wasn't surviving by scraping through the day. She was building something with her own 2 hands. The air inside the bus smelled faintly of honey and yeast, and for a brief, perfect moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were finally rising too. By the time March arrived, winter had begun to retreat from Columbus, leaving the streets damp and glistening with the scent of thawing earth. The bus sat behind St. John's like an aging monument to survival. Its yellow paint faded, its windows clouded with years of dust. But to Emily and Lila, it had become a home. Every morning, Emily would open the side door to let in the light, the air still cool and tinged with the promise of spring. She baked in small batches, now her rhythm confident, her loaves perfectly golden, their scent drifting across the churchyard and catching the attention of passers-by. That was how it started, one curious person after another, stopping to ask about the smell, about the sign, about the story. Carl Brenner was the first to offer help. One afternoon, he appeared with a can of paint and a brush so wide it looked more suited for barns than buses. "This old girl deserves a fresh coat," he said, patting the bus's side panel. "Been standing by too long, kind of like me." He spent 2 days sanding and painting while Emily baked bread to keep him warm. The bright new yellow gleamed in the sunlight, like hope reborn. A few days later, a young woman from the art college down the street, her name was Mia, asked if she could add a mural. "Something cheerful," she said. Emily hesitated, then nodded. By the weekend, the bus had sunflowers blooming across its doors, their petals stretching toward the roof, painted with such tenderness that even Lila stopped to stare in awe. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. A retired carpenter dropped off a few planks of cedar, saying they'd make a fine counter for serving. A local mechanic fixed the headlights for free, just in case you ever want to take your bakery on the road. Each evening, as the work wound down, Emily baked fresh loaves for everyone who had helped handing them out, while the bus glowed with lantern light. "You don't have to do that," Carl told her one night. "You already gave us something better, a reason to show up again." By early April, Helen's bread bus had become a fixture at West Market. People no longer came just for the bread they came for, the feeling it carried the quiet warmth of something honest. Regulars began bringing ingredients as gifts: jars of honey, bags of flour, even a bundle of cinnamon sticks from a woman who said, "My grandmother would have loved what you're doing." Emily always found a way to pay it forward, slipping a loaf or two into their hands with a soft, "Thank you." It was one of those mornings when a woman in a denim jacket approached the stand camera slung around her neck and a press badge pinned to her collar. "Emily Sanders," she asked, smiling. "I'm Rachel Knox with WCBN Ohio. I've been hearing about your bus for weeks. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Emily hesitated, brushing flour from her hands. "I'm not much for interviews," she admitted. "That's all right," Rachel said kindly. "Just tell me what you do and why." They talked as Emily worked the camera rolling quietly in the background. Emily told her about her grandmother Helen, about Grace, the living sourdough starter, and about the people who had helped her paint and rebuild. "It started as a way to survive," Emily said, "but now it feels like a way to give back. Every loaf I make is a thank you." Rachel nodded, eyes glinting with emotion. Before leaving, she bought 2 loaves and said, "You're going to help a lot more people than you think." The segment aired the following Sunday evening. It lasted only 4 minutes, but it carried the weight of something timeless. The title appeared across the screen, "The Bread Bus That Feeds Hope." The footage showed Carl painting Mia's sunflowers gleaming, and Emily handing a loaf to a little boy with both hands. Rachel's voice narrated softly, "In a world where it's easy to lose faith, one woman in Columbus reminds us that you can rebuild life one loaf at a time." Emily didn't even know it had aired until the next morning when her phone began buzzing with messages. "You're on TV," someone texted. At West Market that weekend, she arrived to find a line already forming down the block. People waved copies of the newspaper article that followed the broadcast. "Are you the bread bus lady?" one man called out. Emily laughed, cheeks flushed. "I guess I am." She sold out in under an hour. A customer hugged her after tasting the bread and whispered, "You taste love in every bite." By evening, her small social media page set up by Mia as a joke had hundreds of new followers. Orders poured in from towns she'd never heard of. Local cafes asked if she could supply their shelves. A woman from Cincinnati offered to drive 3 hours just to buy a loaf. Emily sat in the bus that night, the glow of her phone reflecting in her tired but astonished eyes. Mom Lila said sitting beside her, "Does this mean we're famous?" Emily smiled faintly, looking around the bus now alive with color scent and laughter. "No," she said softly. "It means people are hungry for something real." Outside, the street lamps flickered on, and the sunflower mural caught the last golden light of day. Inside, the smell of warm bread lingered, a quiet, steady heartbeat that promised more was still to come. The night it happened, the air was sharp with the first true chill of November. Emily had stayed late finishing the last batch of bread for a morning pickup. The scent of honey and yeast filled the small bus, mixing with the faint hiss of the propane heater. Lila had fallen asleep early, curled up under the old quilt that smelled faintly of soap and flour. Outside, the street was silent, except for the rustle of dry leaves skittering along the pavement. Inside, the lantern light flickered against the sunflower mural, casting soft shadows across the curved metal walls. Emily was exhausted, but content. The orders had been overwhelming since the news feature, but she was managing. She'd even been able to set aside a little savings for the first time in years. For once, she allowed herself to believe that everything might finally be steady. She sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, staring at the city lights reflected faintly on the wet pavement. Somewhere in the stillness, she thought she smelled something faintly sweet, then something acrid. It took her a moment to realize the air had changed. When she turned, a thread of orange light danced along the bottom edge of the curtain. It was so small at first, so quiet, that she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Then the sound came, the faint, hungry crackle that made her blood run cold. "Lila," she cried, her voice sharp in the confined space. She lunged for the curtain, yanking it down, but the fabric flared as if alive flames crawling fast up the wall. Lila woke with a start, coughing as smoke began to fill the air. Emily grabbed her daughter's hand, pulled her toward the door, fumbling with the latch that now felt molten beneath her palm. The night air hit them like water as they stumbled out into the gravel lot, breathless, clutching each other, while the bus flickered in shades of orange and gold. Carl's voice echoed from the rectory next door. Within minutes, he and two neighbors rushed over with buckets and a fire extinguisher, fighting the flames that licked the edges of the roof. It didn't take long before the fire was out, but the damage was done. The rear of the bus was blackened. The windows shattered, the air thick with the bitter scent of burnt fabric and sugar. Emily stood motionless, her arm around Lila's shoulders, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. The whole scene glowed faintly under the streetlight, a ruin made of memories. When the smoke cleared, Emily stepped back inside. Half the shelves were charred, her table warped by heat. The cookbook, Helen's old leather notebook, had survived, though the cover was scorched at the edges. But the jar of grace sat on the counter, cracked and blackened, its contents hardened into ash. Emily touched the glass gently, her breath catching in her throat. "Oh no," she whispered. Lila knelt beside her, small hands trembling. Mom Emily shook her head, unable to answer. It wasn't just dough inside that jar, it was everything that had carried them from despair to hope. She sat down on the step head in her hands, watching the smoke rise into the cold night sky. They stayed at the shelter that night, wrapped in borrowed blankets. Emily barely slept, haunted by the flicker of fire behind her eyelids. When dawn finally came, she returned to the bus. The sunlight made the wreckage look almost gentle. The black soot softened to gray. She walked through the ruins in silence, running her fingers over the warped metal. Lila followed quietly, clutching the unburned corner of the cookbook. "It still smells like bread," the girl whispered, and somehow that broke Emily's composure. She sank to her knees and wept, not loudly, but deeply, the kind of tears that felt like they'd been waiting for months. She didn't hear the footsteps until Carl's voice rumbled behind her. "You're not alone, kid," he said softly. She turned to see him standing with Leonard and Mia, their faces lined with concern. Behind them, more people from the church carried boxes, brushes, and tools. "We saw the smoke," Mia said, her voice breaking. "We'll fix it. You've built too much good here to let it die." Emily tried to protest, but her words came out as a whisper. "It's all gone." Leonard shook his head. "Not all." He stepped forward, holding out a small glass jar. Inside, something pale and living floated, bubbles forming, tiny and determined. "I made a copy of Grace last winter," he said quietly. "I call this one Mercy." Emily stared at the jar, disbelief, softening into relief. "You kept some?" Leonard nodded. "I figured you might need her one day. Guess that day's today." He placed it gently in her hands. The glass was cool, the dough within faintly alive. "Keep her warm, Emily," he said. "You already know what happens when you do." Lila leaned against her mother, her face streaked with soot. "Maybe our bread's meant to rise again, Mom." Emily looked down at her daughter, then at the small jar glowing in the morning light. The bus behind them was broken, but the air smelled faintly of promise, again fragile and alive. The days following the fire felt strangely quiet. The bus, once bright with color and scent, now stood half-charred but not defeated. The community had spent a week helping Emily rebuild what they could, replacing windows, scrubbing soot from the walls, repainting over the blackened streaks. Leonard's new jar of starter Mercy rested on the counter, alive and thriving under Emily's careful hands. The first loaf she baked after the fire wasn't perfect, the crust uneven, the crumb a little dense, but when she tore it open and the smell filled the bus again, everyone who had gathered outside began to clap. It wasn't applause for bread, it was for resilience. Emily felt something shift that day, a kind of quiet rebirth, the kind that begins not with fanfare, but with breath. By early December, life had settled into a new rhythm. Orders trickled back in, and regulars from the market dropped by to see how the bus was faring. Then one morning, while Emily was packaging loaves, Mia came rushing across the lot, her phone in hand and her voice breathless. "You have to see this," she said, nearly slipping on the gravel. She opened a YouTube video titled, "From Ashes to Aroma, the Bread Bus Story." The thumbnail showed Emily's bus under the soft glow of the setting sun, with the painted sunflowers peeking through the repaired panels. The video, made by a Chicago food content creator named Ben Crawford, told their story with haunting simplicity. The fire, the community, the comeback. His voiceover said, "Sometimes the most beautiful things rise from what's been burned." Emily watched in stunned silence. The camera captured her laughing, with Lila handing a loaf to Carl and kneading dough under the dim light of the lantern. There was no dramatization, just truth. When she looked at the view count, over 800,000 in less than a day, she covered her mouth in disbelief. Within 3 days, the video surpassed 2 million views. Comments flooded in from all over the country. "You remind me of my grandmother. I cried watching this. I needed this story today." Emily couldn't comprehend it. "It's just bread," she whispered, but Leonard, standing beside her, shook his head. "It's never just bread. It's what it stands for." That week, a producer from Good Morning America called. Emily thought it was a prank at first until she heard the woman's professional tone and clear excitement. "We'd love to feature you on our show this Friday," the producer said. "Your story has inspired so many people, and we want to share it nationwide." Emily's knees almost gave out. She agreed, though her stomach churned with nerves for days. She wasn't used to cameras or interviews. She was used to dough silence and the smell of yeast. On the morning of the broadcast, Emily and Lila boarded a plane to New York for the first time in their lives. They arrived at the studio just before dawn. The lights were blinding, the cameras huge, and the producers moved like a well-rehearsed dance. Emily stood behind the counter they had set up for her segment, her hands trembling slightly as she shaped a loaf on live television. When the hosts approached, smiling warmly, she took a deep breath and remembered the people back home, the shelter Carl, Leonard, Mia, and the hundreds of strangers who had written to say her story had given them courage. Emily Sanders, one of the hosts, began, "Your story has touched hearts across America. After losing everything, you found a way, not only to rebuild, but to bring joy to others. What kept you going when everything burned?" Emily paused, her hands resting on the dough. The studio went silent, cameras fixed on her face. She looked down for a moment, then met the host's eyes and spoke softly, her voice steady. "You can lose your home, your job, your past," she said, "but as long as you can make someone smile with what's in your hands, you still have a future." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the host's eyes glistened, and applause filled the studio. The words replayed on social media within hours, clipped, captioned, and shared millions of times. Newspapers quoted her. Morning talk shows echoed the line. Even schools and charities began using it in their campaigns. The quote, simple and honest, became a mantra of hope. When Emily returned to Columbus 2 days later, she expected things to calm down. But instead, her inbox overflowed with messages from across the country, cafes asking for collaborations, teachers requesting talks, people offering to donate or volunteer. The bus had become more than a bakery. It was now a symbol. She found herself invited to community fairs, where strangers thanked her with tears in their eyes. "You made us believe in starting over," one woman said, clutching Emily's hands. Emily smiled shyly, still not quite able to see herself the way they did. One evening, as she packed loaves for shipping a new service Mia had helped her set up, Lila sat by the window, scrolling through a video montage of people baking bread at home, all using the hashtag #HashBreadBusChallenge. "Mom," she said, laughing softly, "they're all making bread because of you." Emily looked over her shoulder, her flour-dusted hands pausing mid-air. "Because of us," she corrected gently. Outside, the last light of the day washed the bus in gold, glinting off the sunflowers that had somehow survived the fire, their colors even brighter than before. Emily exhaled slowly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, not pride, but peace. The kind that comes when you finally understand that even what breaks can become beautiful again. The winter after her television appearance unfolded like a slow sunrise. Each week brought something new: letters from strangers, invitations to bake-offs, even a handwritten note from a high school teacher who told Emily her students had watched the interview during class. You reminded them, the letter read, that strength doesn't always look loud. Emily read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside Helen's cookbook. The bus had never been busier. Orders came in faster than she could bake, and the once quiet gravel lot outside St. John's now buzzed with visitors wanting to meet the bread bus lady. Carl joked that the parking area looked like a fairground every Saturday morning. Even Leonard, usually stoic, began whistling again while helping knead dough. Amid all the noise and motion, Emily stayed grounded. Each loaf still carried the same care it had when she baked her first at the shelter, because she knew what it felt like to have nothing but bread and faith to hold on to. One evening, as she sat counting receipts by the lantern, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Emily Sanders," a calm voice asked. "This is Thomas Green. I own a small restaurant group in Brooklyn. I saw your segment on Good Morning America, and I think your story and your bread belong in more than a bus." Emily laughed softly, unsure whether to take him seriously. "Sir, I appreciate that, but I'm not a brand. I'm just Whelmy." Green chuckled on the other end. "That's exactly why I'm calling. People trust you. They trust what's real." He proposed opening a small storefront bakery under her name, Helen's Sunflower Bakery, a tribute to the women who had taught her how to turn flour and water into hope. "I'll handle logistics, investors, and setup," he said. "You handle the baking, the heart, and the story. 60-40 split, you get the 60. Emily's breath caught. She stared at the golden jar of mercy glowing faintly in the corner and whispered, "You're offering me ownership." "I'm offering you a new beginning," Green replied. "One that belongs to you this time." It took months of preparation, late-night calls, license applications, choosing a neighborhood, and arguing over paint colors, but by the following autumn, the bakery was ready. It stood on a quiet street in Brooklyn, its front painted a soft sunflower yellow. The logo above the door read, "Helen's Sunflower Bakery, fresh from the heart." Inside, the shelves gleamed with wooden trays, each labeled with the kind of bread that had once filled the air, of that old bus honey loaves, cinnamon rolls, country rounds. In one corner sat a framed photograph of the bus itself, its painted sunflowers bright against the Ohio sky. Lila, now 11, had her own little apron embroidered with her name. "Do you think Grandma Helen would like it?" she asked, gazing at the display. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "I think she'd say we did her proud." The grand opening drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. Reporters from local stations mingled with neighbors, travelers, and even a few familiar faces from Columbus who had driven hours just to see her succeed. Carl stood near the door, proudly wearing a volunteer taste tester badge that Mia had made as a joke. Leonard was there too, leaning on his cane, his eyes shining as he watched Emily hand out slices of fresh bread to the crowd. "You kept your promise," he said quietly. She looked up at him, understanding. "We both did." Just before noon, someone delivered a large bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. The delivery tag simply said, "From Ohio." Emily smiled, assuming it was from the church. She placed the flowers by the window, their golden heads catching the light. When the last customer left and the noise finally settled, she noticed a small white envelope tucked among the stems. No name, no return address. Curious, she opened it. Inside was an old black and white photograph, her grandmother Helen standing proudly in front of a wood-burning oven, flour on her apron, and a smile as warm as the fire behind her. Tucked behind the photo was a small note, handwritten in looping script that made Emily's heart ache. "You kept the warmth alive. I'm proud of you." She sank onto a stool, the letter trembling in her hands. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Lila came over and rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "What is it?" she asked softly. Emily smiled through tears. "It's from someone who remembered where this all began." She placed the photo on the counter beside the first loaf baked in the new oven. A golden round made from mercy, its crust perfect and strong. The scent filled the room, sunlight spilling across the floor, wrapping everything in a golden haze. Outside, people still passed by the window, pointing and smiling at the bright yellow sign. Inside, Emily closed her eyes and listened to the gentle hum of the oven, the whisper of flour settling in the air, the sound of life continuing. That night, long after the last customer had gone, Emily stood alone at the bakery door, looking out at the quiet street. The city lights shimmered like distant stars. She thought of the journey, the shelter, the bus, the fire, the people who had lifted her when she had nothing left to give. Every scar had led her here. Every hand had helped shape the dough of her story. Behind her, the oven still glowed faintly, its warmth steady and alive. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." The air smelled of bread, and it smelled like home. If this story moved, you take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope can begin in the smallest places. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, each one inspired by real strength, quiet resilience, and the beauty of starting over. Which part of Emily's journey touched you the most? Was it the night of the fire, her first sale at the market, or the moment she received her grandmother's letter? And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know where this story found you.